Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And okay. So I hope you are ready for some more Activision Blizzard absurdity, because some statements to the CMA have now been made public. And yeah, we can see exactly what Sony's quote-unquote concern actually is, and why they believe Microsoft should not be allowed to acquire Activision Blizzard. And just as a bit of a forewarning here, this has got to be one of the most laughable, hypocritical statements that we've seen thus far. Like, okay, on one side, I understand why Sony is fighting against this acquisition in terms of business. This obviously is going to affect them. But just wow at the gall of their statements here. So, yeah, we're going to get into all that later on today. Also, a rumor seems to be going around that Nintendo is refunding Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Is this really another Cyberpunk situation, or is something else happening here? We're going to dive into that one as well. As always, though, before we get started, do make sure to hit those buttons below, like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Yes, we've now gotten to 50,000 subscribers. Thank you all again, by the way. But I plan to have gaming updates for you all for a long time going forward, so now we're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and let's make it happen together. With that said, though, let's just go and get this party started with God of War Ragnarok, because Sony Santa Monica has got to be celebrating right now. They did just announce Ragnarok has surpassed a major milestone, because check this out. God of War Ragnarok is now officially the fastest selling PlayStation first-party game of all time, selling a whopping 5.1 million units in one single week. I mean, we are talking about an exclusive title here, selling 5.1 million units in a single week. That is absolutely insane. They did, however, surpass The Last of Us Part 2, which was the previous record holder at 4 million sold in 3 days. Now, we don't know the first 3 days for Ragnarok. This is a full week, but this is still a pretty big discrepancy between the two, so I do imagine there's a nice little gap here. Also, when all said and done, I think God of War Ragnarok will just have stronger legs in general, as The Last of Us Part 2 was a lot more controversial, to say the least, which might have affected its longevity. Either way, though, I mean, honestly, God of War's success, it is just so well-deserved. It is, once again, a masterpiece of a single-player game. The combat is masterfully done, the story, the characters, the animations, just all of it are industry-defining. They really are, and I mean, they just did such a stellar job with this game, and because of all that, they've been heavily rewarded for it, as you can see here. So, big congrats to Sony Santa Monica and PlayStation for all of their success with God of War Ragnarok. Next up, one of last generation's best games is now getting an update so it can inevitably be one of this generation's best games. And of course, I'm talking about none other than The Witcher 3. Its next generation upgrade is slated to release on December 14th, so just go and mark your calendar for that. And they just released a fancy new trailer that shows off some of those new enhancements. This will include a 60 frames per second performance option, but just to kind of be clear here, even on performance mode, it will still look much better than what it did on the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. However, if you are one of those ray tracing fans, you can also choose to play at 30 frames with ray tracing on. Options are always nice, of course. It'll also have FSR 2.0 implementation, DLSS if you have an NVIDIA GPU on PC. It has reworked foliage, which that's actually a pretty big one there. It'll also have improved textures. There's new details such as smoke from villages from a far distance, and all of the characters, monsters, and environments have been upgraded. So it does appear, and based off the trailer here, I mean, it's looking pretty nice. It does appear that they've put a real effort into upgrading this game. And what's even better is that all of this is completely free if you already own the game. Like I said before, you know, this is one of last generation's best games, and it's actually aged really well. I actually went back to replay this game about a year or so back, and I mean, I was impressed by how good this game still looks. But with these enhancements, it's gonna age even better. I really believe that this is gonna be an RPG that fans talk about for decades coming, because it is that good. And this upgrade, if anything, should only make it better. If you haven't already played this game, though, definitely do so when this update is out on December 14th. I cannot recommend this game enough. I mean, I know for me, I might be tempted to go back and play this game once again. Alright, so let's just go ahead and get into this Activision Blizzard situation once again, because things are starting to get absolutely absurd by this point. Now, I know there's been a lot of drama leading up to now, and we've gotten the sense that Sony has been spewing some of these things to these different regulators based off the verbiage that's been used, especially with the CMA, and why they said that they were moving into the second phase of their investigation. Now, to be very clear here, and I always say this because, well, it's true, going into the second phase of the investigation was always expected. But it has become more and more evident over time that Sony is in the ears of these regulators. Well, there's what we're going to talk about today, because the CMA just made Sony statements to them public for everybody to read, and just, wow, is kind of my immediate reaction here. Again, I think that we already had the sense that they were saying some of these things to different regulators, so a lot of this isn't really new per se, but I mean, when you read it, it's just kind of like, wow, how hypocritical can Sony actually be? I mean, this is blasphemous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absurd. And it just seems like it is so disingenuous. I mean, a lot of the arguments kind of repeats what we've already been hearing for a while. But out of this entire lengthy statement, I will leave a link in the description below if you want to read it all. But here's the quote-unquote concern that I found to be just so absolutely laughable. So as you can see here, Sony told the CMA consumers would be harmed. In the short term, PlayStation users would no longer have access to Call of Duty or would be forced to spend £450 on an equivalent Xbox to play this hugely popular game on their less preferred device. Now, right away, that's already been debunked. Sony specifically says here in the short term, which we know for an absolute fact, that's not true. It was just discovered a few short days ago that Microsoft offered Sony a 10-year deal to ensure Call of Duty will in fact remain on PlayStation. Now, Sony declined to comment on that offer, so this statement by Sony trying to claim that PlayStation will move Call of Duty in the short term isn't even close to being true. But you know what, let's just kind of go ahead and continue on. So they say, in the midterm, a significant number of PlayStation users would likely switch to Xbox and or Game Pass. Faced with weaker competition, Microsoft will be able to increase console and game prices for Xbox users, including those that had switched from PlayStation, increase the price of Game Pass, and reduce innovation and quality. These harms will be amplified by the direct and indirect network effects at play in the industry, allowing Microsoft to further raise prices or reduce quality once its position has become even more entrenched. Now, that there is the part that is just so absolutely mind-blowing. Sony, out of all companies, is voicing their concern that prices for games and consoles could increase. How laughable is that? They are basically saying that they're concerned about Xbox becoming more like PlayStation, that they too might raise the prices. I mean, I guess otherwise, are we just going to go ahead and ignore that Sony was one of the first companies to raise the price of their games from $60 to $70? Are we just going to act like that never happened? This is also just mere months after Sony raised the price of the PlayStation 5. I mean, what are they even doing here? This statement should just be thrown out immediately for the irony of it. Sony already did these things, and if you remember right, as soon as the PlayStation 5 increased in price, my response was that Sony did it because they can. It's that simple. Sony knows that they have the market power to raise the price with little repercussion, and if anything, that there is the exact reason on why they need more competition, because the things that they're complaining about, they already do themselves. They already have that dominant place in the industry, and it's why they need more competition. This acquisition would actually help out with that. So, yeah, their argument here, mind-blowing is all I can really say. Listen, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Sony is not concerned about Call of Duty exclusivity. They know it will remain multi-platform. They're just using this as an excuse to stop this acquisition. What they're really concerned about, though, is its inclusion to Xbox Game Pass. And that actually leans into their next concern here, which is actually a little bit more interesting. So they say, post-transaction, Microsoft would have the ability and incentive to exclude or restrict rivals, including PlayStation and PlayStation Plus, from having access to Call of Duty. The decision identifies 5 recent Microsoft acquisitions of game studios where, shortly after the acquisition in question, Microsoft changed the business model of the acquired studios and withdrew new titles from competing platforms. As the CMA found, Microsoft has a pattern of acquiring development studios and making their upcoming games exclusive to Xbox. Given the significance of Activision's titles, Microsoft would have an even stronger incentive to make them exclusive to Xbox and Game Pass post-transaction. In fact, Microsoft does not contest that it intends making Activision content exclusive to Game Pass and denying PlayStation Plus access to that content. Now, that there is actually really interesting because, like I said all along, this acquisition is more about Xbox Game Pass than it is about exclusivity. See, I think Microsoft will be more than willing to make some concessions. If they have to put in writing that Call of Duty will be on PlayStation for the next 10 years plus, as we've seen already, they'll be willing to do that. However, when it comes to subscriptions, I don't believe Microsoft will be as willing to make that concession. They want Call of Duty exclusively on Xbox Game Pass, and it'll be very interesting to see whether or not regulators have a problem with that. Sony in the statement did also say that Xbox Game Pass has 29 million subscribers, which that's actually new information there, but Sony claims that they lag far behind that number, and Call of Duty's inclusion could more or less give them a dominant lead in which Sony just can't recover. So we'll see if regulators have an issue with all of that. I think that's the one place that Microsoft could run into issues if these regulators have a problem with that. I mean, we'll kind of see. I think there are some counter arguments that could be made here. Microsoft can easily just kind of point to Sony just uses a different strategy for their games. They don't really invest into their subscriptions in the same way. There's nothing stopping Sony from releasing their AAA games day one into their service, but they just prefer to release them for $70. And I mean, we just talked about it earlier. God of War Ragnarok, it launched to a just massive amount of success. It sold 5.1 million units in a single week. So, I mean, on one side, Sony wants to act like they can't compete, but then in the same breath, you have games like God of War Ragnarok, just putting up these just insane amount of numbers. So, I don't know. Either way, this situation just continues to get more and more absurd. Let me know what you all think about all this, though. Do you think Sony has a point or not? Let me know in the comments below. Moving on, though, let's go and talk about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. As we all kind of know by this point, these games, they're having issues, and it's led to a lot of disappointment, and I'd say understandably so. I think on one hand, these are good games. I think in many ways, it's the evolution that the series needed. But the problems, they do, yes, hold these games back, and quite frankly, they're inexcusable. I mean, I don't know how Game Freak wouldn't know about a lot of the problems before release. I mean, the issues in this game, they're pretty widespread, so it is a little surprising that they released it in the state that it's in. However, with all that said, with just so much buzz over these issues, there is now a rumor going around that things have gotten so bad that Nintendo is refunding these games. Kind of similar to what was happening with Cyberpunk 2077. Now, it appears that this rumor started over on Reddit, and then different websites started to report on it, like DualShockers, as an example. But basically, a Reddit user made a thread explaining how they got a refund. They called Nintendo's customer support, told them that they'd only played it for an hour or two, and then they got a refund. So this news has gotten around with a lot of people just assuming that that means everybody can get a refund. Well, that's not really entirely true, though. I mean, from that Reddit thread alone, other users claim that they called and they received no refund. So it actually seems like there's a little bit of a mixed bag here, and what I think is actually happening is that, again, this person told Nintendo that they had only played the game for an hour or two. So they might have been under that time limit needed for a refund. I mean, if you've been playing this game for like 20, 30 plus hours, it's probably going to be doubtful. And from my own experience, when you call customer service, a lot of the times what happens really just kind of depends on the agent that you talk to. Some will be more lenient and do as much as they can to possibly help you, while others, they just don't care, and they'll just kind of move along. So the person that you talk to does matter, but what I can tell you is that if you are hearing the rumor that Nintendo is accepting a refund for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, that doesn't actually seem to be true. Now, with that said, though, if you have only played an hour or so, and if you just don't like it, and if you purchase it on the eShop, yeah, you can go ahead and try to call up Nintendo and see what happens. In some situations, they might refund you. Either way, I mean, I just hope this game gets a patch soon. I did make a separate video on how you can kind of fix some of the problems temporarily in this game, but yeah, I'm really hoping we get a patch soon that will fix these problems more permanently. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though, where I asked you all, what is your favorite standard Xbox controller? So I'm not talking about like the Elite Series or anything like that, just the standard controllers. And as you can see here, the Xbox Series was the runaway winner here at 63%. This was a little bit of a surprise for me. I actually thought this would be a little bit closer, especially with the Xbox 360, but that did come in at second place with 22%, then the Xbox One with 9%, 4% for the Xbox Duke, and then 3% for the original Xbox S. But yeah, the Xbox Series was a runaway winner here. They basically took the Xbox One controller design and then they improved upon it. And I will say for myself, it does have my favorite D-pad for just all controllers right now. It is also very comfortable, and I also really like that they added textured grips and textured triggers. Now, honestly though, I think all of these controllers are good. I don't think that there's really a wrong decision here, but I think that if anything, Xbox has just kind of improved upon their design over time by adding new small features. Like I just said, those textured grips, I mean, that makes the world of difference for me with the Xbox Series controller. I think for nostalgic purposes though, it's tough for me because I do remember the Xbox 360 controller just being so comfortable. I think Loudest Cricket says it well here though, as they say, I've got to go with the Xbox 360 controller on this one. It was the evolution that the Xbox controller needed, and generally speaking, set the framework for Microsoft's more modern controllers. Replacing the black and white buttons with bumpers and adding a home button were huge improvements over the previous iterations. And they were tough. I've probably worn through half a dozen rubber caps on analog sticks of old Xbox 360 controllers, but they all still work just fine. On the other hand, my Xbox One controller appears to be pretty new, but has stick drift like crazy. Now, I think the first thing that you said there is exactly correct. The Xbox 360 did set the framework for their future controllers, and that's one of the reasons it was such an amazing controller for its time. It kind of reminds me of the GameCube controller in the sense where it can still hold its own in today's world, and that's a true testament to how good their design was all those years ago. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget to hit the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.